There is a door inside the Great Pyramid that no human hand had touched in 4,500 years. It sits behind a wall of stone on the north face, less than a meter from the surface. Tourists walk past every single day, and until a few years ago, nobody even knew it was there. Then, a camera thinner than a pencil slid through a crack in the masonry, and for the first time since the pyramid was sealed, light fell on the inside of that space. What the camera saw was not treasure. It was something stranger. A narrow corridor with a steep angled ceiling, rough unfinished walls, and tool marks still fresh on the stone, as if the workers had walked out mid-task and the mountain had been closed over them. They found the opening behind a set of massive, slanted blocks arranged in the shape of an upside-down V. The corridor runs about 9 meters long, roughly 2 meters wide, and it was hidden inside solid rock, invisible from every chamber ever mapped in the pyramid. No door in the traditional sense, no hinge, just a void the builders walled up and expected no one to ever see again. And here is the part that should stop you. This space had been sealed since the reign of the pharaoh Khufu, the man who ordered the Great Pyramid built around 2560 BCE. It was there when Rome rose and fell. It was there when the first cathedrals went up in Europe. It was there through every war, every empire, every explorer who ever climbed those stones, convinced he had seen everything the pyramid had to offer. And they were all wrong. There was a room they walked past, over and over, for millennia. But a hidden corridor is only where this begins, because that same scanning project found something else deeper inside the pyramid, something far bigger, a void so large that scientists still cannot agree on what it is or why it exists. And beneath the plateau, under the causeway that runs between the pyramids, there is a third sealed space flooded with black water that people were afraid to enter for generations. 3 sealed spaces, 3 separate secrets, and the tools that finally cracked them open did not use a single shovel. To understand how we found a room no one had entered since the Bronze Age, you have to start with the wall itself. And with the strange arrangement of stones that had been sitting in plain sight, quietly guarding the entrance, for the entire history of the monument. Those slanted blocks on the north face have a name. Archaeologists call them chevrons. They are enormous limestone beams set in that inverted double V pattern, and for centuries their purpose was obvious to everyone who looked at them. They sit above the original entrance to the pyramid, and the standard explanation was that they were structural, weight-bearing, great triangular braces built to take the crushing load of the stone above and redirect it around the passage below, so the entrance corridor would not collapse under the mass of 2.5 million blocks stacked overhead. A clever bit of ancient engineering, nothing more. For a long time, that answer satisfied everyone, because it was reasonable and because no one had any way to see what was behind them. But that explanation had a problem. If the chevrons were only there to relieve pressure over the entrance, why were there more of them than the entrance needed? Why did some of them sit in places where there was no known passage underneath at all, bracing against nothing? A French architect named Jean-Pierre Houdin had spent years modeling how the Great Pyramid was constructed, and his work predicted something unsettling. He argued there should be an internal corridor hidden above the main entrance, part of a route the builders used deep inside the structure. He said this before anyone had the ability to look. For most of the field, that prediction sat in the category of interesting speculation, the kind of idea that is impossible to prove and easy to ignore. For decades, researchers noted the oddity of the chevrons and moved on, because there was no way to test it. You cannot take the Great Pyramid apart to check a hunch. You cannot drill into a World Heritage Monument because a few stones look misplaced. The question just sat there, unanswerable for generations, until 2015, when a project began that did not need to touch the stone at all. It needed something falling out of the sky. Here is where the investigation turns, and where the mythology of the pyramids collides with hard physics. The team was called Scan Pyramids, a joint mission led by Cairo University and a French Heritage Institute. And their method sounds almost like fiction. They used cosmic rays. Every second, particles from deep space slam into the top of Earth's atmosphere and shatter into tiny subatomic fragments called muons. These muons rain down on the planet constantly, passing through your body, through the ground, through solid rock. But they lose energy as they travel. The denser the material, the more muons get absorbed. So, if you place detectors inside and around a massive stone structure and count the muons arriving from every direction, the empty spaces show up as bright paths where too many particles got through. Solid stone blocks them. Hollow rooms let them pass. It is like taking an X-ray of a mountain using the exhaust of exploding stars. The technique has a strange history. Back in the 1960s, a physicist named Luis Alvarez tried almost exactly this on the second pyramid at Giza, placing muon detectors underneath it to search for hidden chambers. His equipment was too crude to make real images, and he found nothing. But he proved the principle worked, and half a century later, the technology finally caught up to the ambition. The Scan Pyramids team had detectors sensitive enough to not just sense a void, but map roughly where it sat and how big it was, all without moving a single stone. In 2016, those detectors started picking up an anomaly right behind the chevrons on the north face. It began as a thermal anomaly, a patch of the surface behaving differently than the stone around it. Then, the muons confirmed it. More particles were arriving through that spot than solid limestone would ever allow. There was a void back there, something hollow. The team placed nuclear emulsion films from Nagoya University in the descending corridor below the chevrons, then added real-time detectors from the French Atomic Energy Commission. Then, between 2020 and 2020, two brought in the Technical University of Munich to run ground-penetrating radar, ultrasound, and electrical resistivity scans across the stones. Four completely different physical methods developed by teams from 3 continents, all pointed at the same patch of rock. Every single one agreed. Behind that wall, sealed inside the pyramid, was an empty space no record had ever mentioned. They pinned it down to a corridor-shaped void, sitting between roughly 17 and 23 meters above the ground, less than a meter behind the outer casing. And it had been hidden for 4,500 years. The problem was reaching it without destroying anything. And this is where the story stops being about ancient Egypt and becomes about a crack the width of a pencil. The team studied the joints between the chevron blocks and found a tiny gap, an opening in the seam behind the lower stones, barely 6 millimeters across, smaller than the tip of your little finger. On February 24th, 2023, they threaded an endoscope, a camera on a flexible cable just 5 millimeters thick, through that gap and pushed it into the dark. If this investigation into forgotten chambers and lost engineering is the kind of thing you want more of, take 1 second and subscribe. Because what came back on that camera feed rewrote what people thought they knew about the inside of the Great Pyramid. The footage showed a corridor with a high vaulted ceiling, gabled like the underside of a peaked roof, unusually wide for the Great Pyramid, with walls left rough and raw. The floor was irregular. Tool marks scarred the stone. There were no inscriptions, no gold, no sarcophagus, nothing that glittered, just an empty, unfinished passage that had been perfectly sealed and completely forgotten, and the sheer plainness of it was the eerie part. Every famous space in the pyramid is polished, deliberate, ceremonial. This one looked like the builders had simply stopped, walked out, and let the wall close behind them. It matched, almost exactly, the hidden corridor that architect Jean-Pierre Houdin had predicted years earlier from his construction models. He had pointed at a spot on a drawing and said a passage should be there. And a camera the width of a drinking straw, threaded through a crack no one knew existed, proved him right. Not similar to the known corridors. Not a version of them, a brand new space found on camera 4.5 millennia after the last worker left it. The mainstream reading came fast, and it is worth taking seriously. Kate Spence, an Egyptologist at Cambridge, and others argued the corridor was almost certainly practical, a construction feature, maybe another weight-relieving space to protect the entrance, maybe part of an access route the builders used and then closed. The rough finish supported that. This was not a ceremonial hall meant to be seen. It looked like working infrastructure, walled up when its job was done. And that is probably true. But notice what that answer quietly admits. It means the people who built the Great Pyramid were routinely creating hidden internal spaces, sealing them, and leaving no record of where they were. It means the monument is riddled with intentional voids we have not mapped. If they hid this one so well that it took cosmic ray physics to find it, the obvious question becomes unavoidable. How many more are there? And that question leads straight to the discovery that dwarfs this corridor completely. Because while the North Face corridor was the first space they confirmed, it was not the biggest thing the muons revealed. Deep in the heart of the pyramid, high above a passage called the Grand Gallery, the same detectors found something that made the corridor look like a footnote, a void at least 30 meters long, nearly 100 feet, big enough to swallow a commercial airliner. They announced it in the journal Nature in 2017, and the scientific community confirmed the results independently, which almost never happens with claims about the pyramids. This was real, peer-reviewed, and enormous. They named it the Big Void. And unlike the corridor, no camera has ever been inside it, no endoscope has reached it. To this day, no human being has any physical access to that space. We know it is there, we know its rough size, we have absolutely no idea what is inside. For decades, the assumption about the Great Pyramid was that we had already found everything. 3 known chambers: the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, and the unfinished subterranean chamber cut into the bedrock below. That was the map. That was the whole building, as far as textbooks were concerned. The Big Void shattered that. It is the first major internal structure discovered inside the Great Pyramid since the 9th century, when the Caliph al-Ma'mun tunneled in and found the main passages. Think about that gap, over 1,000 years, with no new rooms, and then cosmic rays reveal a hollow space the length of a jetliner sitting above the Grand Gallery the entire time, directly over the heads of every tourist and archaeologist who ever stood inside. The numbers around this pyramid make the void even harder to dismiss. The Great Pyramid covers more than 5 hectares. It stands about 139 meters tall today, and it held the record as the tallest structure built by human hands for nearly 4,000 years, until an English cathedral finally passed it in the 14th century. It is made of an estimated 2.5 million stone blocks, some of them weighing as much as small trucks, stacked with a precision that modern builders struggle to match. This is not a loose pile of rubble where an accidental gap might form. Every space inside it was placed there on purpose. So when a void the length of a 100-foot corridor turns up in the densest, most carefully constructed section of the whole monument, the idea that it is just leftover empty space starts to feel thin. Somebody built that void. Somebody meant for it to be there, and then somebody sealed it so thoroughly that it took the exhaust of dying stars to prove it existed. So what is it? Here the experts split, and every explanation has a crack in it. Kate Spence proposed the most grounded idea. She suggested the Big Void might be an internal ramp, a sloped passage the builders used to haul the massive granite roof blocks up into position over the King's Chamber, then left empty or loosely filled with rubble once construction finished. It fits the location. It fits what we know about the impossible logistics of moving 60-ton stones dozens of meters into the air. If she is right, the void is not a chamber at all. It is a fossil of the construction process itself, the first direct evidence of how the pyramid was actually built. which is a mystery that has stumped engineers for 200 years. But that explanation has a problem too. Salima Ikram, one of the most respected Egyptologists working in Cairo, pointed out that we are guessing, and she said so bluntly, warning that it is never too early to speculate, but you might be widely wrong. And there is another possibility that hangs over the whole thing, one that turns the void from an engineering curiosity into something far more haunting. Khufu's body has never been found. Not here, not anywhere. The granite sarcophagus in the king's chamber was discovered empty, lidless, with no trace of the pharaoh who ordered the largest stone monument on earth, built to house himself for eternity. Think about the strangeness of that. A king spends decades and the labor of an entire nation building the most elaborate tomb in human history, and when explorers finally break in, the coffin is empty and the body is simply gone. No mummy, no treasure, nothing. There are two ways to read that emptiness. Either grave robbers stripped the chamber clean in antiquity, which is the standard explanation, or the king was never in that chamber to begin with. And that second reading changes everything. Because if the king's chamber was a decoy, a magnificent bait designed to be found and looted, while the real burial waited somewhere else, then the Great Pyramid would need a second hidden chamber, a better one built to never be found. So when a void the size of an airliner turns up, sealed in the core of that same pyramid, unreachable, unexplained, directly connected to the chambers below, the question writes itself. Some researchers have raised the obvious possibility out loud. Could the big void be the real burial chamber? The place the builders actually hid the king, above the decoy, in a space so well concealed, it defeated every explorer for 4,500 years, and only surrendered to particles from outer space. Nobody can confirm it. Nobody can rule it out, because after 4,500 years, we still cannot get inside. And that is the maddening part of this entire story. We have technology that can see a hollow space through 300 feet of solid limestone using particles from dead stars, and we still cannot answer the simplest question a child would ask. What is in the room? The Egyptian antiquities authorities have been cautious to the point of resistance. When the Big Void was announced in 2017, Egypt's Antiquities Ministry publicly criticized the Scan Pyramids team for going to the press before consulting Egyptian archaeologists. And the head of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, Mostafa Waziri, moved quickly to downplay it. He suggested it was likely nothing more than a gap left over from construction, a space made to relieve structural strain, and not a chamber worth the excitement building around the world. Whether that caution was scientific prudence or something closer to territorial instinct, the effect was the same. The excitement was dialed down, and the plans to actually reach the void quietly stalled. There is a long, tense history behind that reaction. For more than a century, foreign scientific missions have descended on Giza, eager to announce breakthroughs and plant their names on the pyramids. And Egyptian officials have grown wary of watching their heritage turned into headlines they never approved. You can understand both sides, but the practical consequence is hard to ignore. The most significant interior discovery in the Great Pyramid in over 1,000 years has now been sitting confirmed, mapped, and peer-reviewed for years. And still, no one has been permitted to cut even a pencil-width path to look inside it. The corridor got its camera because a natural crack happened to exist. The void has no such crack, and no one in authority seems in a hurry to make one. The void is real. The reluctance to open it is also real. And both of those facts are now part of the mystery. Whatever is inside that space, someone would rather leave it sealed than find out. That is the corridor and the void, both sealed inside the pyramid itself. But the strangest sealed space at Giza is not inside a pyramid at all. It is underneath the plateau, buried in the bedrock, and it is full of water. Here is where it gets stranger, because this one people knew about for centuries, and they were too afraid to go all the way down. Beneath the stone causeway that connects the second pyramid to the Sphinx, there is a vertical shaft cut straight down into the rock. It drops in stages, descending in places to nearly 100 feet below the plateau. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt around the 5th century BCE, wrote about an underground tomb, ringed by water, where he believed a pharaoh was buried, though he admitted he never saw it himself, and was repeating what local guides told him. For over 2,000 years, that account was treated as a traveler's tale, a garbled rumor, the kind of thing Herodotus got wrong all the time. The shaft's real bottom stayed out of reach because the lowest levels were drowned. Groundwater from beneath the plateau had flooded the deepest chamber and turned it into a black pool. For generations, local guides and village children actually used the flooded shaft as a swimming hole, splashing in water that sat directly on top of a sealed ancient chamber nobody could reach. In the 1930s, the Egyptian archaeologist Selim Hassan reached part of the way down during his excavations and confirmed the structure had multiple levels, but the flooding beat him. The pumps of the era could not clear it, funding drifted to the Great Temple sites, and by the 1940s, the shaft slipped back into silence, half explored and quietly forgotten. The water had done what the builders may have intended. It sealed the chamber more effectively than any door. And there, the mystery sat, drowned and dismissed, for another 50 years. Then, in the 1990s, the Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass returned to it with modern pumps and refused to stop until he hit the bottom. By that point, the water table under the plateau had dropped just enough to make the attempt possible, but the lowest levels were still flooded, and the pumps had to run constantly just to hold the water back. His team drained the shaft level by level, fighting groundwater that kept seeping back in through the rock, and descended through 3 distinct levels cut deep into the bedrock. The middle level held granite sarcophagi set into carved niches in the walls. At the lowest level, flooded and silent, nearly 100 feet beneath the plateau, they found a chamber with a massive granite sarcophagus, along with human bones and pottery shards. To even date the place, they had to lower a boy down on a rope into the water-filled tomb to collect artifacts from a space no adult could safely reach. The layout of that final chamber, Hawass noted, was shaped to resemble the ancient symbol for a house, and the plateau itself carried a name in the old texts that referred to a lord of hidden underground passages. He named it the Osiris Shaft, after the Egyptian god of the underworld who was believed to rule the tunnels beneath the tombs of kings. Local people had long believed the place was cursed and warned that no one should enter it. When Hawass finally reached the bottom, he called it his favorite discovery, the most exciting work of his life. A real chamber matching the drowned tomb Herodotus had described more than 2,000 years earlier. Not a myth. A recording. The old historian had been right, and everyone had spent 2 millennia assuming he was wrong. So step back and look at what Giza is actually hiding. A corridor sealed since Khufu, found by a 5mm camera through a crack in the stone. A void the size of an airliner, confirmed by cosmic rays, that no one has ever entered. A drowned chamber under the causeway that guarded its secret with black water for 2,000 years. 3 sealed spaces on one plateau, each one hidden by a different trick, and every one of them was found only in the last few decades, using tools the people who built these monuments could never have imagined. Now, does any of this prove the wilder theories? Does it mean lost civilizations? Or advanced technology handed down from somewhere else? Or secret knowledge deliberately buried under the sand? Probably not, and it is worth being honest about that. The most likely truth is that the corridor is construction infrastructure. The big void is probably an internal ramp or a relieving space tied to how the roof blocks were maneuvered into place. The Osiris Shaft is most likely a symbolic tomb, a ritual descent into the realm of the underworld god, built and reused across different periods of Egyptian history. These are grounded, evidence-based explanations, and the archaeologists offering them are careful, serious people. But here is why that does not make any of this ordinary. Even the boring explanation is staggering. It means a Bronze Age civilization working with copper tools and rope and raw human muscle built a monument so sophisticated that it contains sealed internal passages we could not detect until we harnessed particles from exploding stars. It means they engineered hidden voids on purpose, closed them so precisely that the seams held for 4,500 years, and left no map behind to tell anyone where they were. Think about the confidence that takes. You do not hide a corridor inside a mountain of stone unless you are certain of your own engineering, unless you have done it before and know the wall will hold. These were not people fumbling toward architecture. They were masters of it, working at a scale and a precision that still humbles the engineers who study them today. And the drowned shaft under the causeway proves the same point from another direction. The builders understood the water table beneath the plateau. They cut down through the bedrock, knowing the groundwater would rise and fill the lowest chamber. And some researchers believe that was the point, that the water itself was meant to be part of the tomb, a barrier and a symbol at once. Either way, it worked. That chamber stayed sealed by nothing but black water for over 2,000 years, and it guarded its granite coffin until modern pumps finally beat it back. It means the greatest monument complex on Earth is still, right now, only partially understood, and every new tool we point at it finds another room. The mystery was never really about lost gods or visitors from the sky. The mystery is that ordinary human beings, 45 centuries ago, built something we still cannot fully read. And the biggest question of all is still sitting there, unanswered, in the dark above the Grand Gallery. The Big Void has been confirmed by multiple independent teams. Its size is not in dispute. The technology to see it exists and works, but no camera has ever crossed into it, no endoscope has ever found a crack to slip through, and the authorities who control access have shown little appetite for cutting a path to reach it. So the largest hidden space in the Great Pyramid of Giza remains exactly as the builders left it, empty or not, a ramp or a tomb, holding the missing pharaoh or holding nothing at all. We do not know, because after everything, after the cosmic rays and the peer review and the endoscopes threaded through pencil width cracks, the last door is still shut. The stone is still there. The void is still sealed. And somewhere above the heads of the tourists, filing through the Grand Gallery, in a space the length of an airliner that no living person has ever entered, the Great Pyramid is still keeping its oldest secret. If you want to see what else these scans found buried beneath Giza, watch the next investigation on screen now.